Hello, Canadian Campaholic here on a very warm July afternoon. It's been a while since we posted anything on the channel, but before we get into today's topic, I just want to put a little PSA out there that we are currently on a camping hiatus. We changed our tow vehicle and currently don't have the funds to necessarily get the brake controller set up in our replacement tow vehicle. So if you enjoy the channel, if you appreciate what we post, you can either click on the PayPal link in the description below or use the thanks button below this video with a heart with a $sign on it. Any contributions, no matter how small, are greatly appreciated. It'll help us get back on the road before the season ends and produce more content. The theme of today's video, though, is a little bit of hot water tank maintenance. Sorry if the audio is bad. I've misplaced my lav mic, so hopefully you can hear me okay. There was an Amazon sale recently, so I went online and I picked up this Camco water heater tank rinser. I'm not sponsored by Camco. I bought this myself. When you have a hot water tank, and I think this is true whether it's Suburban or Atwood, which are the two major ones you're going to see in North America, you will often get sludge building up in the bottom of the tank. From what I've read online, it's the result of minerals in the water from the heating process. It is also a result of your anode rod, your sacrificial rod, which some tanks have, disintegrating and fragments of it coming off. The anode rod is for tanks that are steel, and it's designed to be sacrificial so that it corrodes instead of your tank corroding. The school of thought, though, is that if you let that sludge and debris build up in the bottom of the tank, it can actually make the bottom of the tank corrode. We've had this trailer now since late 2017, and I've never rinsed the bottom of the tank. I'm pretty sure there's a bit of slime in there. So, pretty basic contraption. It attaches to the end of a hose. I've got our hose hooked up to municipal water, and there's a large wand here that we're going to put into the bottom of the tank to try and flush that sediment out. An additional step that you can take, which I've also seen online, is to use the bypass on your water pump and pump in a vinegar water mix specifically into your hot water tank. Apparently that helps clean the calcium and debris out even better. We're not actually going to do that today. We're just going to do the rinse and see how we get on. So before we can even start doing the flushing piece, we actually have to drain the hot water tank. Now I typically will drain the tank down if it's going to be more than, say, 3 or 4 weeks before we go camping again. Different schools of thought on how often you should empty the hot water tank. But usually in a normal season, we go camping on a fairly regular enough basis that I don't need to drain it down all the time. But since we're on a bit of a hiatus, as I explained, we're going to drain the tank down and go through the flushing process. Always a good idea before you do this to bleed the pressure off of the tank. The way I do it is there's a pressure release valve. Remy, if you want to show them that, down on the tank. This is a Suburban hot water heater, by the way. Your tank may differ. And I'm just going to pull up on that valve and bleed off the pressure. Now, even if you haven't used the tank in a while and you haven't had any hot water for a while, as you can see, there will still be pressure. Even if you go bouncing down the road, this thing will build up pressure. I shared in a previous video that I didn't do this one time because the tank had been sitting around for a long period and the anode rod shot out. It could have hurt somebody, sprayed me with a jet of this nasty, messy white water, and it was a real disaster. So always bleed the pressure off before you take that anode rod out. If you haven't already, get yourself a 1 1/16 inch socket. I think that's pretty much a standard size for these anode rods. The other piece of advice is be very careful when you're trying to take the anode rod out. The metal steel on the baffles here for the flue is very sharp, and I may or may not have cut my knuckles off a couple of times doing that, so be very careful. So we're just going to make sure that we're in position here. We're going to put this on the anode rod and just very gently crack the pressure off. There we go. It's a little tight because I put some Teflon tape in there to help it stay sealed. And now it should be finger loose. And we'll pull that out and that'll drain. Oh yeah, you can see we got a lot of sediment and crap in there. definitely time for a rinse. Now let's take a look at the anode rod. This is a magnesium anode rod. There's magnesium and aluminum. Aluminum is better for hard water situations, but it does tend to corrode and perish a lot more quickly than a magnesium rod. This one is, geez, it's about a year old now, and there's still a lot of life left to it. The controversy with magnesium rods, though, is that if you have very hard water, it can react with the water and create a gas. I can't remember what the name of the gas is. I'll put it below. But it creates a rotten egg smell. It's like a sulfuric something or other gas. I'm going to sound like an idiot trying to say it, so it's below my face right now. But it can create a rotten egg smell. It can make the water a little bit cloudy. So sometimes magnesium rods are not super popular. But anyway, we're going to let that drain down. I'm going to put the rod somewhere safe, just so that it's out of the way. And while that's draining, I think what I'll also do is I'm going to open up the low point drains and drain the plumbing. Because again, I don't know when we're going to be able to camp again without that brake controller. So I don't want all that water just sitting in the pipes. Different schools of thought. Some will say if you drain it, you leave condensation that can lead to mildew. Some will say if you leave it in, it's worse. You do you, but I'm going to empty the low point drains here in a second and just empty that out. So we'll rejoin the action in a minute when we're ready to use the Camco Tank Rinser. Now the one possible challenge for us with this is that all the outdoor taps on our property are connected to a sandpoint well. I'm not going to use them because the water's not filtered and the pressure's not that great. We are hooked into a tap in the basement, but I've got in excess of 50 feet of hose here, so the pressure might not be the greatest. But basically I'm going to insert this into the opening, put it as far back in the tank as I can. Let's switch her on and see what happens. Oh, we got some, ooh. Oh yeah, we got some crap coming out of there now. Oh, that's like, it's almost like milky tea. Now, knock on wood, we haven't had any corrosion issues with this tank. We haven't had any leaks. So we've been good, but I noticed the last couple of times that I took the anode rod out that there was quite a bit of sludge on the bottom. You could put your finger in here and you could feel all the crap that had built up on the bottom of the tank. So basically what I'm doing is I'm keeping the nozzle down and I'm pushing it to the back of the tank and sweeping it forward. I'm even kind of dragging it on the bottom a little bit. And that water is certainly coming clearer. Who knows, maybe later we'll try the vinegar rinse process. See if that'll get the tank super clean. We're not full-timers. We only do 2 or 3 nights at a time, so I imagine our tank's in fairly good condition. The surface rust that you're seeing there on the threads is pretty normal. Alright, let's shut this off for a minute. Let that finish draining out. Now the water's not crystal clear, but it's certainly better than it was. Let me just very carefully stick my finger in here and, oh wow, yeah. Okay, so there's a little bit of grit on the bottom, but not a lot. I can feel the bottom of the tank. It's fairly smooth, but there's still a little bit of sediment, so let's keep blasting this thing. It's a little flexible, but I don't want to snap the damn thing and get it caught in the tank. That would not be good. So just be gentle. Take your time. If you've got water restrictions in your neighborhood, do this on a day that corresponds to the regulations. Don't get yourself in trouble. And maybe don't wear Birkenstocks when you're doing this. Whoa! Yeah, that water's, the instructions basically on the back of the packet say 2 or 3 minutes until the water flowing out is clear. Close the drain, purge all air before you turn the gas back on. Well, yeah, that just means fill the tank back up full before you turn on the gas, which makes sense. That's easy. You just run the hot water tap from the furthest distance away, bleed the air out, and work your way back towards the tank. usually ending up in the kitchen, bleed the air out with the hot water faucet. And once you've got water coming out of the hot water faucets without any air, then you can run the gas without any issues. But yeah, I would say that water is pretty clean. And a lot of this sludgy stuff, I don't know if you can see that, is what we're rinsing out. And a lot of it, again, is minerals from the water. A lot of it is crud coming off the anode rod, which is good. The anode rod's doing its job. But you really don't want that in your drinking water. The water pump does have a screen on it to filter a lot of this stuff out, but a certain amount of that will run through the pump, and I imagine over time, that's not good for the pump. We've never noticed an eggy smell from our hot water, even after we switched to this anode rod. But again, we're talking fairly light use. We use hot water mostly for washing dishes and maybe using the shower. If we're going to drink anything, it's from the coffee pot or from the kettle. And we usually fill that with cold water, so. Keep it stop going. So another little tip that might help you with your hot water heater is when I take the anode rod out, there's a lot of corrosion that gets into the threads here of the tank. Some of it is calcium buildup and mineral buildup from the water. Some of it is perished Teflon tape. But you can discover over time that when you go to put the anode rod back in and you get it lined up and you start tightening it, that it'll only go a few turns and then you can't thread it in any further. Now that's not good. You don't want to tighten it so much that you pull the threads, but you definitely want it nice and snug in there, and certainly more than just a few turns. So a good friend of mine who's a full-time RVer gave me this tap. It's a 3/4 NPT tap. I guess it's for plumbing. I'm probably not using the proper terminology. But basically, what he said to do was lubricate this with a little bit of olive oil, because you're putting it into a drinking source. Very carefully line it up with the threads. And you really want to make sure that you have it lined up with the threads, because it's going to basically cut the crap and crud out of the threads and clean them up. But if you don't line it up properly, you could end up damaging and destroying the threads. So, you know, do this at your own peril, I guess. But basically what I did was I got it lined up really close to the threads and like where it needs to be. Gave it a few turns by hand to make sure that it was lined up, and then I just put a wrench on the end of it and very gently gave it several turns, and it just scraped the threads clean and cleaned a lot of that gunk and that crap out of there. And then that way, when I put the anode rod back in, I was very easily able to tighten it up sufficiently with the Teflon tape, and it didn't leak anymore. Prior to that, I was noticing that I was getting some drips coming out of the drain plug, even though I was using Teflon tape, even though it was nice and snug. And using this little tap for threads, again, I might not be using the right term, really made a big difference. If this is not something you're comfortable with, then maybe go and see an authorized RV service technician to look at that for you. All right, so all that's left to do is to put the caps back on the low point drains and put the drain plug back in. Again, this anode rod is still got a lot of meat on it and some life left in it, so it's ready to go. Try to remove as much of the old Teflon tape from the threads of the drain plug as you can, and then put a fresh wrap of a couple of passes, at least 2 or 3 passes of Teflon. That way when you tighten this into the tank, it helps create a better seal. And again, you don't want to you know, wrench on this thing when you tighten it. You just want to make sure it's nice and snug, but you don't want to put it too much torque, because you'll pull those threads on the tank and damage them. This is a bit of a tricky process. You want to get down and close to the tank and line it up, and I always try to sort of lift it up a little bit to kind of get those threads lined up, and you want to get it as straight as possible. You don't want to cross thread this thing and start to strip it. So once I'm confident I've got it lined up, I'll just start to give it a few turns by hand, and I can already feel that it's not grabbing, so I'm just going to reposition it a little bit. Let's see if I can get it to turn. Doesn't want to bite. Might have to use my little tap to clean the threads. We'll see. All right, she started. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to use my wrench now. Whoops, switch it the other way. See if I can very gently start to tighten that in. I may have used a little too much Teflon. Okay, so that was a perfect example of how not to do it. I tried to finger tighten it, it wouldn't. I tried to put the wrench on it, just a slight little bit of pressure from the wrench, and it wouldn't move. So I immediately knew I had a problem. So I took it right out, didn't want to risk damaging it, lined it up again, and now with my fingers, I can turn it several turns. It's starting to get a little snug now. We'll put the wrench back on, the socket back on. There we go, that's what we want. Anytime you feel like you're having to really force it, then that means you're not lined up properly. And again, I just want to just get it snug right about there. Yeah, very nice. Just so that it doesn't leak when you run the tank. So, all right, that'll do it for this video. Again, hopefully you are managing to get out and enjoy the 2022 camping season. We're keeping our fingers crossed that maybe we can get the funds together and maybe get out there in the fall. But that'll do it for now. Thanks for watching. We'll talk to you later.